Chapter 9 Graveyard Shack. Joe came on Tuesday to say that Nate Goldsmith had postponed his trip to the store for 2 weeks, as well as the opening of school. He concluded, corn and pumpkins are still in the field, apples to pick and potatoes to harvest. But the exam! Inwardly, Beth was thinking about mailing the brooch. Also, she must get a letter off to Mama. There had been no communication since she had posted a letter home at Reading. In it, she had given a glowing account of the trip. Mama never liked bad news. Years of shielding her had created a pattern. Anyway, friends would be asking, and I'll give their tongues no chance to wag. Better a girl in her position be called fickle over the broken engagement than jilted. And better yet, if she could carry off this great adventure aura she had woven so cleverly before coming west. Joe smiled and responded to her question. Nate will pick up papers and proctor the test in due time, but you passed his examination last week. He's a stickler on this commitment business, which reminds me, he made mention of church. Beth nodded, wondering what was expected of her. Would you like me to pick you up Sunday? And any day could be our last for using the arbor before the rains set in. That would be nice, Beth murmured. Actually, she felt a need to sort things out. Church hadn't been a part of her plans here. Of course, she had committed herself, but something else troubled her, too. Remembering the harmless little incident coming back from the Goldsmith house warned that she was less immune to love than she had thought. Memory of Joe's hand, warm through her thin blouse, brought a blush, and his slight stammer said he was self-conscious in her presence again. Abruptly, Joe changed the subject. Will you be needing supplies for school? Beth had given the matter no thought. Am I to furnish them? She asked. Oh, the youngsters bring their own. I meant personal things, boots and other rainwear. You know, umbrella and a slicker. She glanced at Joe's face. No, he wasn't teasing. Are they essential? Both of them looked at her pearl-buttoned shoes. This time he laughed. Afraid so. Sometimes the general store stocks them. Mostly people order from the catalog, or else hope the backpack peddler happens to have a pair that fits. Is there nowhere to shop? This was incredulous. Well, there's Portland, a 2-day trip each way. Talk of isolation. Well, Mama had said it was a wilderness. Little did she know what it was like to live in one, though. As it turned out, the arrangement never materialized. On the following Saturday, Joe dropped by Turnaround Inn to say he would be in town several days. Town? Well, the general store. Upstairs had some business offices. Doc Dulles' blacksmith shop and shed next door. Smithies sometimes pulled teeth. Mercy, did Joe have a toothache? Nothing like that, Joe smiled. The examining board, Mrs. Malone called. Refreshments, before Beth could decide if it were proper to ask what the board was, or what it had to do with Joe. Over cinnamon rolls and coffee, Mrs. Malone asked about Joe's tests, as she added to a list of staples she wanted him to pick up at the general store. I'm prepared, he said slowly, except for... He stopped in embarrassment. Beth made a mental note to ask Mrs. Malone what tests Joe was taking and why he was embarrassed. Is there something I can do for you, Miss Kelly? I must tell him to use my first name, except in front of the children, she thought. He's Joe to me, and... Miss Kelly? Sorry, Beth mumbled. Yes, there is, please. I'd like you to mail something. Excusing herself, she went for the overdue letter to her mother. Anything more? He asked when she handed it to him. Beth hesitated. No, I think not. She was still undecided how to handle the return of the brooch to Jonathan Blake. On the front porch, Joe paused. Wilson offered to come for you Sunday. Beth's lips pursed for a no, but before it came, she remembered that the Malones needed no additional passengers. 7 of them, plus O'Higgin, she was sure, made a wagon load. Oh, not to forget the dog. Wolf always goes, Andy had said, just in case. She hadn't cared to know of what. Miss Kelly? Joe prompted again. That would be nice, she murmured, careful to use the same words in exact tone as when she had accepted his own invitation. Then, as an afterthought, she added, Call me Beth. Aren't we friends? Indeed we are that. Joe mounted Dobbin and waved goodbye. Well, out of the frying pan and into the fire, Beth almost laughed aloud when she caught Mrs. Malone's unique speech entering into her own thinking. Anyway, the analogy best described the trip to the brush arbor. She would not be alone with Joe, after all, but she would be alone with that unnerving Wilson North. Nothing about Wilson should have surprised her, but the wide tired, two-wheeled cart in which he called for her on Sunday did. The single seat was upholstered in carmine stripes. So was the enormous umbrella, which he had opened above it. How vulgar! And what on earth occupied most of the seat? Wilson's command answered the question. Wait here, Esau. Esau, whose canine coat put wolves to shame, showed no intention of leaving his throne. Back home, they would be the laughing stock. Crispeth jabbed a hat pin through the wire frame of her plumed hat. Maybe the monstrous animal would tree the feather, thinking it was a bird. Remembering Wolf's antics last night, which had sent the possum scurrying up the backyard cedar, made her laugh again. Or maybe it was Wilson North, his outlandish vehicle, or the creature he called Esau. Traces of laughter lingered when Wilson knocked, called, "Open sesame," and entered. Well, now that's a pretty sight, you laughing. But his sweeping glance from the velvet hat to the high-buttoned shoes said Wilson North appreciated more than her smile. She straightened her face primly, then, in strange contradiction, she felt unexpectedly glad that she had left the lace bertha on the blue wool for the Sunday service. Charlie Horse, Crispeth giggled at the name too, was impatient to be off. Once she was wedged between the right rail and Esau, who refused to budge, the black pony shot forward. The dog, thank goodness, looked straight ahead. To Crispeth's surprise, the cart balanced perfectly for easy riding. She found herself almost light-hearted as they entered the stretch of woods leading past the goldsmith place. Easy, boy, Wilson reined in as the trail narrowed. Crispeth again drank in the beauty of the brilliant leaves. She remembered then that the man beside her was a botanist. What kind of trees? Vine maple. Aren't you writing a book about trees? Wilson nodded, but changed the subject. Colorful, aren't they? Sort of the garden variety. See, there's cantaloupe orange. He pointed to a near gold leaf. The game caught her imagination. Beet red, she suggested, of a scarlet leaf, realizing that her comparison was trite. Watermelon, then? They both burst into laughter. Strange, she thought, how she had laughed with both men in the same enchanted place. Only there was a difference she would have been unable to explain. Abruptly, Wilson consulted his pocket watch. Time to drop by for a squint at the graveyard shack before the singing begins if we step along. The what? Place you're considering as a home, so they tell me. Oh, the cabin. Is it really called that? That's what it is. Crispeth stole a look at the clean-shaven face above the starched collar. Handsome, she had to admit, but not smiling, and something about that made her apprehensive. Let's go, Charlie Horse. At Wilson's words, the pony backed his ears and picked up speed. It's like a colored kaleidoscope, Crispeth thought, and we are inside, alone.